It's a Buckeyes Live edition number 190 here at the Voice of College Football. And we've got the typical cast of characters here. We got Kevin Noon next to me, Buckeye Huddle. So catch him right there, as well as Tony Gerdeman at Buckeye Huddle. And we will tell you about their ventures here in the next few minutes. But we got Steve Hellwagon, of course, as well. 247 Sports, Buck Nuts. How we doing, guys?
Good. Doing great.
Doing well.
So a playoff appearance, of course, good for the fans, good for business too. Kevin?
Yeah, absolutely. There were a lot of nervous people. First there were a lot of despondent people when Ohio State lost its last regular season game, and then we got to Friday night and the Pac-12 championship game, and that game did surprisingly really good numbers in the Columbus, Ohio ADI. I'll never really understand why, but when the dust settled, Utah beat USC, and that opened the door. And then Ohio State got even a little bit more help that I don't know if it was necessary with TCU losing to K-State. But Ohio State, the lone one-loss team standing at the end of the year. And despite the best efforts of Nick Saban and maybe a couple of TV types, Ohio State gets the call.
It was interesting to see Nick Saban on at halftime of the Big Ten championship game, using that time when the Big Ten should have been, or Fox should have been pumping up their television partner. But, I think the four ended up as they had to. Like, those were the only four that could have been in the playoffs at that point. Alabama had no argument. And, Mark, Kevin and I were doing a live stream of the reveal, and it was so weird how they were delaying the reveal of Ohio State or of the number 4 team, because the drama to me was 3 or 4. It wasn't 4 and 5. So it was bizarre. I don't know what they were saying, what they were pumping up during the show, but what was taking so long to reveal that number 4 team? I didn't understand it.
Well, I think they know that the ratings are going to drop off the cliff as soon as the 4 are revealed. But I totally get your point. But yeah, there's quite a bit of a portion of college football nation out there that was either hoping or believing, fearing Alabama would be chosen and somehow make some kind of miraculous leap based on absolutely nothing that happened on the field.
Yeah, it was a crazy last few days. I think as you watched the USC game kind of unfold and you saw that Utah was going to put it on them, you kind of eventually realized that USC was not going to finish in the top 4. And then all the speculation is, does Ohio State get in? Does Alabama get in? What happens with TCU? And there was even sentiment, when Kansas State's up 10 points in the second half, if they go on and make that 17, does TCU drop out of the playoff? And the way it played out, where they got the game to overtime and then inexplicably, have 3rd and goal at the 1 and don't put it in the end zone on 3rd or 4th down. And, now you've just opened the door. I'm driving back from a funeral in Cleveland over the weekend and listening to it. I was about Ashland when I turned to my wife. I said, this game's over. Kansas State just needs to go 8-10 yards, kick a field goal, and, raise the trophy. And yet, even then, I couldn't reconcile in my mind how at 12-1 they would leave TCU out with an overtime loss to a team that they'd already beaten. So I think it all worked out in the end. Mark, I know you and I go back and forth on this every year. Last year, it all just locked into place. I mean, at the end, with Michigan beating Ohio State and Cincinnati beating Notre Dame, it was pretty obvious what the top 4, along with Alabama and Georgia, was last year. And this year, you could draw a line. Underneath all the teams with 0 or 1 loss, there were exactly 4 of them. And you put those 4 teams in the playoff, and everybody else can shuffle off to the Nowheresville Bowl and, have a great holiday season and start buying players for 2023.
Steve, you got me on this one. I'm not.
I got you 2 years in a row, Mark. I got you 2 years in a row. It just falls into place. And we only got 1 more year of this.
Although I don't know Cincinnati, but anyway. But you
got one more year of this where we have to worry about top 4. I mean, as we all know, the records reflect that all the way back to 05, other than the Fickle year, Ohio State's in the top 12 every year since 05. What is that, 16 seasons or whatever, other than the Fickle year in the probation year where they were 12-0, they're in the playoff every year. So, it's going to be like Duke in the NCAA tournament. I mean, you have to have a federal investigation if you don't make it. So
what I found amusing but also disturbing about Nick Saban's little parade tour there was that his number one card that he's throwing down on the table are Vegas point spreads. And I'm thinking, really, you're Nick Saban. So you're telling me that if I stand up in a news conference and I ask you a question or I present to you why playoff teams should be deserving, and I'm going to make my first point or any point to be Vegas point spreads, Nick Saban wouldn't shoot that person down and say, what does Vegas have to do with football? Really?
Well, I really don't believe Nick Saban believed what Nick Saban had to say during his media tour. I think it was an expectation. You got to keep the fanatics happy by going out there and stumping for your team. But there was no energy in his statements. There was no real anything in his words. And yeah, it was a lot of empty words about point spreads and, well, we've only lost by X amount of points. Well, you've lost twice. And honestly, you probably should have lost 4 times. You should have lost to Texas. You should have lost to A&M. So, we're playing really good. We're playing really well right now, which is obviously a shot at Ohio State. I mean, a lot of people were trying to make it Alabama versus TCU or whatever. No, it was absolutely Nick Saban saying it was Alabama versus Ohio State, and that Ohio State, in a game that it lost by 22 points, that it was losing by 8 points with about 7 minutes to go. And I'm not win denying and saying that, Ohio State didn't lose the game. Ohio State lost the game in spectacular fashion. But, it was a lot of empty words, and I really don't know if Nick Saban really had a lot of piss and vinegar in his blood right there as he was trying to stump for his team.
Absolutely. Besides 2006, does anyone recall Urban Meyer? Now, answering questions at a news conference, let's say after the Big Ten championship game, is one thing. Of course, he's, coaches in those positions get asked, is your team worthy of the playoff? And I remember Urban Meyer saying, yeah, I believe we can play with anyone. You certainly expect that.
I'm going to assume he did in 2018, but like offhand, I don't recall that happening. But I mean, it's just expected at this point, and it's been expected for years. That's why you bring those coaches on, and now we're going to bring on blah 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 to rile up the people and get them angry about somebody else presenting a case.
Meyer definitely pushed it after the 2006 SEC championship. He definitely pushed his team as hard as they'd let him, And then 2017, the precedent was set. In 2017, Wisconsin was undefeated. They were the number 4 team. Ohio State had already had 2 losses and needed to play a letter perfect game, and they really didn't. They kind of screwed around, and they beat Wisconsin 27-21, but they had 3 turnovers in the game, and you just didn't get the sense that there was going to be a lot of movement for Ohio State to put them into the playoff. I think they ended up 5th, and Alabama, which was 11-1, I think probably lost to Auburn that year and didn't make the SEC championship game. They backdoored their way in, without a championship game appearance. The very same premise, the very same scenario worked in Alabama's favor just 5 years ago. Oh, how they forget. And, now it worked in Ohio State's favor. To me, and I know we can get into this through the balance of the show, it just seems to me that Georgia and Michigan are on a separate level, a separate plane, and at least that's what they've shown. And then TCU and Ohio State are kind of like, the next step down, and then there's a big chasm to me, or a chasm of some degree after those 4. So I think there's a top 2, a next 2, and then everybody else after that. But I think the top 2 are pretty much on a level by themselves, and it's going to take quite an effort by either the underdogs in the semifinals to pull off a win, in my opinion.
Although if we use Nick Saban's logic and where he goes for his information, the top two is Ohio State and Georgia because they're favored by more than the other teams. They're favored by they'd be favored over Michigan. They'd be favored by over TCU by more than Michigan is. So, but that's, there's no way to know who's better between Ohio State and Michigan. So we'll have to wait until maybe the championship game to know that.
Boy, oh boy, wouldn't that blow everybody's mind?
I wonder what we would have to do, like 4 weeks if this was Ohio State, Michigan in the semifinals, what 4 weeks of dealing with that would have been like, because 1 week was exhausting and it's my favorite thing all year long. But to have like 4 weeks of Ohio State, Michigan hype, I think you need to contain it to a week or 9 days or whatever the championship game would be, because I don't think the world or our sphere can handle 4 weeks of that.
No, it'd be like in modern storytelling in movies, or especially in TV, and having an A plot line and a B plot line. You'd have to break it into some smaller plot lines or whatever because people would be exhausted. I mean, and I'm not talking just people having to write about it or talk about it. I think everybody would be physically exhausted going through not only the holiday season, but 4 weeks of build up to that game. And, we're really putting the cart before the horse. I know that a lot of Georgia fans and just Ohio State haters have found their way into all of the streams at this point. So I'm not making a prediction at this point of Ohio State will be playing January 9th. So calm down or whatever. But if we get a week of it, it's going to be a lot. It's going to be a lot. Red Bull, I'm here to be sponsored. I will drink your product exclusively.
And I'm seeing people in the comments thinking I was serious when I said there's no way to know who is better between Ohio State and Michigan. I saw the game. Don't worry. We know what happened there.
Yes. If you're not familiar with Tony's humor, then, it's the sly smile and it's the delivery that you got to appreciate. Absolutely. CJ Hicks, not a good Ohio State Michigan game for him, right down the field, and bam, that was quite the collision. And do we know anything more about his status?
All I've heard is it's going to be a prolonged recovery for him. And, probably worst case scenario is you might miss part or all of the spring football. But, I think that his trajectory at Ohio State at the linebacker position kind of depends on what happens with Steele Chambers and Tommy Eichenberg. Do one or both of them pursue the NFL after this season? If so, then he'll have a chance to play more than just a few plays next year. If not, he's probably going to watch those guys continue to play those positions. So, that's the long term. You hope in the short term that he's able to get back as soon as possible so he has a great winter and spring. But what I heard was it was going to be a little bit of a prolonged recovery from whatever happened. It looked like I thought a foot or an ankle. Somebody said they thought it was the knee, but I don't know. That's just my vague recollection of what I recall.
Yeah, going back to, was it Urban that had dings, bangs, and then like injuries or whatever? And like a ding was like a week and a bang was more than a week. And then if it fell under a different classification, it was going to be something more significant. This is not a ding or a bang. This is going to be something, as Steve said, that's a little bit more prolonged.
Obviously, once the playoff seedings were revealed, there was a portion of Buckeye Nation that dreaded seeing, the ones and the fours line up as they did, although we should just be happy and ecstatic to get into the thing. The possible dread of getting embarrassed, I know that fear's out there, of course, and then there are those who are just happy and optimistic and see it as an opportunity to get together what a lot of people thought were the two best teams in the country when the season started. And really, unfortunately, I guess the important part of all this is what the players and the coaches are capable of preparing themselves for. So the rest of it's just hype and discussion. But Tony, what are your thoughts on this? Your initial thoughts on the Georgia matchup?
We just did a podcast, Buckeye Weekly podcast, dropped it yesterday. We Tom Moore and I rewatched the Georgia-Oregon game. And you watch that game and you wonder, wow, how is anybody going to beat this Georgia team? Because they looked incredible and they're throwing the ball all over the place and they've got a bunch of different weapons, and defensively Oregon can do nothing against them. But I'm interested to see what they look like when we go and watch the Kentucky game or the Missouri game, and these closer games. I don't think we'll do Kent State, but watching that, it's clear that they have a lot of talent, and Ohio State's going to have some issues with the tight ends. But I'm always one who has said, if your best weapons on offense are your tight ends, then you're not all that unbeatable offensively. And so they have some issues at receiver, and I say issues that they manage to work it out how they do it. And Stetson Bennett is, I don't think he's a Heisman finalist. I mean, I know he is. I think it's pretty ridiculous that he is, but in that game against Oregon, he was incredible, and he's calm. He makes plays. He does whatever is necessary, and he's a guy that he's the meme with the dog X-ray. He's got that dog in him, and so he's impressive that way. Defensively, they've got just a bunch of guys that they throw at you, and so in terms of the matchup, Ohio State's offensive line is the interior of the offensive line, I think, is the biggest concern there. And can they run between the tackles? Because I don't know that they're going to be able to run wide stuff and outside stuff because Georgia can move. So I think if they can get push up front, then that would be a huge thing. And I guess maybe see some tempo, that sort of thing, to keep a Georgia defense locked on the field. If you get guys on the field that you want on there, and some of the guys that you don't want out there are on the sidelines resting, don't let them come back on the field. Just stick tempo and keep going. But I think it's obviously Ohio State's going to be the underdog, and they should be. And but throughout the season, I've said, and everybody else has said, there's no unbeatable team out there. Georgia has flaws. Ohio State has flaws. We'll just see whose flaws shine bigger that day.
Yeah, it's going to take Ohio State to come out and run a very solid game plan and execute. And that's two things there. And I have a pretty good feeling that they'll have a good game plan. The execution remains to be seen. Who's going to be able to go out there? What's going to happen at this point? I mean, you go through Georgia's schedule. It's not like they've, absolutely obliterated teams all the way, but, the 49-3 win over Oregon is very real. The 50-30 win over LSU, it was not a 20-point game. It felt more like a 40-point game, if we're being completely honest with ourselves. I'll kind of dismiss the 16-6 game against Kentucky. That was just the weird week where everybody had a hangover. Ohio State was playing in a windstorm in Evanston that week. But there are just games on there where I'm just not overly impressed with maybe the offensive side. The defense, I think the Georgia defense is every bit as advertised, and I think that's going to be the issue. These little screens not going to work. Ohio State's going to have a lot more vertical play. They're just going to have to be more decisive in what it is that they're going to do. Not to get ahead of myself, CJ Stroud, bring your running shoes, because you're either going to be running north-south or you're going to be running east-west, because Georgia's going to get after you. But Stetson Bennett, I mean, I'm sitting here and I'm looking at his stats right now. Went 3 straight games without a touchdown pass. Granted, it was Kent State, Missouri, and Auburn. He's a 68% passer, which is great. 20 touchdowns against 6 picks, but he's just maybe, game manager 2.0. Maybe he's just what a modern day game manager is supposed to be. I'm really shocked when I looked at Georgia's offensive numbers in terms of its national rankings. They're a lot better than I would have ever expected them to be, but there's just nothing in the Georgia offense that really jumps off the page. But maybe that's why they're so good, because everything fits so well together that even if something isn't working, everything else can carry them across the finish line. So a lot to unpack there.
I think their execution is really good. I think that they've got a handful of running backs who they rotate. They've got 3 or 4 guys who are between like 400 and 700 yards. So they kind of share the load with that, whereas Ohio State barely has anybody healthy to carry the football. So that's kind of a flip situation there. throwing the football. I think I think last year you'd say he was the caretaker. This year he's become a little bit more of a playmaker. Bennett has, but again, their defense gave up 500 yards passing to LSU, including like 250 to the backup Neusmeyer, who got in there after Jaden Daniels got hurt. So what does that mean? Does that mean, they're going to be susceptible to Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka in the passing game? They could be. Their outstanding corner, Keely Ringo, who was like one of the heroes in the championship last year. I think he had a big pick to seal that game. Talking to our Georgia publisher, he said Ringo's been picked on a little bit here down the stretch and has not played well. Their safeties are pretty good. As Kevin said, their front, even though they lost some guys off last year's team who were first-round NFL draft picks up front, they're still really good. So Ohio State's got its work cut out for them. And, this was kind of this is what makes me kind of worry about Ohio State. And, first, the defensive and offensive play calling I'd say the defensive play calling in the Michigan game was an F. I'd say the offensive play calling in the Michigan game was about a C. I think the execution and sharpness of the team was about a D. I think on defense, you have safeties staring into the backfield and getting beaten deep. You have safeties and corners panicking in coverage and fouling the receivers. You're whiffing on tackles. You're not getting off blocks. You're not pressuring the quarterback. Offense, you're dropping passes. You're missing blocks. You're having false start penalties at home. What do you think it's going to be like in a dome where it's like 150 decibels and everybody's rooting for Georgia? You think what's the over under on DeJuan there? 3, 4? I don't know. You tell me. So they have so many areas where they weren't sound, where they weren't good, and didn't look like the number 4 team in the country. They looked like the number 54 team in the country, to be quite honest with you, in that game. They looked like an 8-4 team trying to play an undefeated team in that game, and that's how they played. They have got to play – they got to correct all of that. The coaches have to call a much better game, and they just have to hope that Georgia helps them, is kind of my feeling. I don't know. I kind of liken this to the Florida State Sugar Bowl with Andre Wadsworth. Like, they've got dudes who go out and do it, and Ohio State's got a pretty good team that was 10-2 that year, lost to Michigan and Penn State in the regular season, and got, by virtue of their Ohio State, got shoved into the Sugar Bowl and, lost the game 31-14. This is what this kind of feels like. Maybe the LSU national championship game, one team's 2 touchdowns better before the game starts, and lo and behold, they ended up 2 touchdowns better. So Ohio State's got to play way over its head, in my opinion. They got to get their crap straight. I mean, that's all there is to it. And here's another thing. From the neck up, they practiced twice last week. I had a list of 7 to 10 guys who were going to opt out of a Rose Bowl or an Orange Bowl. C.J. Stroud among them, Paris Johnson, probably DeJuan Jones, maybe Matthew Jones. There's 4 right there. Maybe Zach Harrison, 5, 6, 7, who knows? Ronnie Hickman, maybe, he's already declared. So they come out on the practice field last week. They're not in the playoff yet. What's going through those guys' mind? Why am I out here? What are we doing? That had to be going through their mind. Like, why am I standing on a practice field at Ohio State when we're not in the playoff and I don't even know if I want to play in the bowl game? Why am I here? Those thoughts had to be permeating through 7 or 8 of these guys' head. And now, you're in the playoff. You're going to play, aren't you? You're going to play, aren't you? We're going to go try and win it all for good old State U. You tell me, where's this team at mentally? Where are they at? Where's the leadership? I don't know. I'm skeptical.
Yeah, I have that same question, because you do have guys that once the loss to Michigan happened, the season was over.
They checked out.
And now you've got, and Jackson Smith and Jigba checked out long before that. And you see the attempts made there for him to come back. I don't know how strong they were, but it's you've got a long time to get back into that mode. And Ryan Day said they had 2 good practices last week, but I think once you check out, I think it's hard to check back in, especially when you've had guys that, and I think you're seeing this all around the nation, where guys are starting to check out earlier because they're looking at their next place to come because of NIL or because of playing time, because of the NFL, where everything speeds up in college football. And I think the looking over to the other side of the grass is also speeding up for a lot of guys. So I think it's going to be very difficult, or it's going to be not necessarily difficult, but it's going to be a challenge for Ryan Day. It's something that he's going to have to do, is to get everybody checked back in. And, I don't know how easy it is. I mean, it sounds easy. I just don't know that it is easy.
I want to get to a point that Steve made, and maybe a little disagreement I have about Ohio State having to play out of its head. No, Ohio State has to play where it was earlier in the season. And granted, a lot of the teams earlier in the season were inferior competition, but Ohio State has shown what it is capable of doing. Beating Georgia is not something that it's going to be, I hope. Ohio State has what it takes. Can Ohio State realize that? Can Ohio State re-engage? As both Steve and Tony have both said, it's a matter of re-engagement. I don't think that I would feel better if Ryan Day were more in the mold of Urban Meyer. This is the time where if you're going to come out and really try to fire your team up and get them whipped into shape, this is the time to do it. I don't know if when Urban Meyer was the head coach of the Buckeyes, I think everybody was constantly in fear of Urban Meyer coming around the corner and yelling at him, and maybe not something that's sustainable throughout the entire season. Everybody was able to exhale when Ryan Day became head coach. It was a lot more agreeable. It was a lot of the tension was taken out of the air. But now as the team lost its edge because there's not enough of that going on. And you can't go back to the days of Woody Hayes and very, very, very physical coaching. If you kind of catch my drift of what's going on there, you're never going to be able to get back to that days. And maybe even in the days of yelling and screaming and getting in dudes' faces, it goes away. Well, heck, screw you. I'm going to the portal. I don't like that. I'm going to go find somewhere to get what I like. But I think Ohio State is going to have to do more than swing and fight and tough love and all that crap to be able to re-engage. That's, as I sit there and say this, I'm already kind of writing a story in my mind, and it's going to be about re-engagement.
Those are exceptional points right there, because it's daunting enough to try to match these teams up from a physical X's and O's, just purely football standpoint. And the mountain is difficult to climb just there. But to Kevin's point and everyone's point, Ohio State is certainly capable. The talent level is comparable on these two teams. So that's not the issue. It's, well, Ohio State has shown all these flaws throughout the season. And I'm sure if we had covered Georgia football extensively, play-by-play for 13 games, we could find some flaws there. So they've certainly shown up, just not on the big stage in obvious ways and less recently. And but when you guys dive into all of that, I thought that was expertly stated by all three of you, because that's what's been roaming around in my mind, but just not stated quite as well or specifically about that challenge. Absolutely. Urban Meyer, 14-3 in the postseason. I think there's something there. I think there's something to him being a college coach, and Ryan Day, highly successful, of course, from week to week as a college coach, but maybe a little bit more NFL style in him.
Can I just, anytime people start reminiscing and talking all great about Urban Meyer, I always have to jump in and remind them of the way the 2013 season ended, the way the 2014 season started, the 2015 season starting being number one ranked and having 5 or 6 guys on suspension. Like, these guys were all, Urban Meyer wasn't able to motivate those guys during the season at all. 2016 team getting shut out in the playoffs, wasn't able to motivate them to score a single point. 2017 losing at Iowa by 30 or whatever wasn't able to motivate them to stay in that game. 2018, Purdue. So like but I also agree with Kevin, like this team needs a little bit of fear in it right now, and not fear of Georgia, but like fear of Ryan Day. And I don't know that that's the relationship they have. And that's it. They have a healthier relationship, but maybe healthy is not what you need right now. Maybe a little bit of fear is maybe more suited to what's coming.
Everybody loves the crazy girl. Everybody loves the crazy girl. Steve, you're muted.
Famous for getting on these riffs. I got on a riff last night on my chat that I just wonder about the off-season program. I mean, this is 2 years in a row where Michigan, I wouldn't say they out-toughed them necessarily. I think they out-mentally toughed them more than they out-physically toughed them, because there were so many mental mistakes that were made in the game. And then at the end, I mean, Michigan didn't run for 250 yards until it had touchdowns of 75 and 85 yards at the end of the game. I mean, for the balance of the game, they were under 100 yards rushing until the last 10 minutes of the game. So and it wasn't that they got out tough, they got out schemed, they got out executed on those two plays. I mean, again, Kerry Combs was sitting in Cincinnati watching that game, just laughing how bad Jim Knowles called that game. That's how bad that was. So, I just look at it and I wonder, they talked about last year how tough the offseason was. Oh, Mick, he's just going to run them directly through those brick walls. It's going to be, wow. It was tough. It was tough. And you read about the St. Valentine's Day Massacre where they blow everybody out. And you go back to a year ago, was it Williamson and whoever it was on the day of the Rose Bowl got loose on Twitter and said, their methods, really were counterproductive at times, doing rope drills at 6 a.m. and then you can't even use your hands when you go to class to take notes or whatever, because your hands are bloody and everything from doing rope drills. What the hell do rope drills have to do with proper coverage of a receiver in the end zone? I think it's time that they football train the guys, get them in shape, lift them, get them stronger, faster, whatever, but maybe a little bit less of the team kumbaya, flight or fight bullcrap. And let's work them on football technique, because that's woefully lacking right now at a number of positions. They're also injury prone. I don't know if that was because they went way hard in practice to get physicality and they left so many guys. How many guys would play the week before and then mysteriously not play the next week? How does that happen? Because they got beat up on Tuesday and Wednesday. That's why. So they got a lot of problems. They need to reassess everything they're doing from the top down. And one of the things that I said, they need to football train. I get it. I know you want the strength of the unit and the 9 units working in concert, and the guy on defense has got to become one with the guy on the offense and lift each other up and move tires and all that dumb crap. No, football train the guys so that they can actually play the game of football. The best cohesive team units that you'll see, the ones that go 15-0 because the players are good football players, not, some great workout warrior on February 14th getting blown out in the massacre.
But there are limitations as to what you can do according to the NC2A in February. So I agree with 85% of the point, but you can't football train at that point. You can't do anything with a ball. You're not necessarily going to be able to do anything that's going to translate directly football-wise. But I do have some questions about where they are in terms of strength and conditioning. You also have a team that doesn't have to play into the third and fourth quarter all that much. So we don't know what this team can
competitive
do
stamina
when the chips are down and what's against the wall and everything else. And, I have a lot of issues with a lot of things I've seen in second halves, because you sit there and you're carrying guys out through the third quarter and sort of running the offense and sort of not. And then when you have to bring these 2s and 3s in, and you go into lockdown mode, student body left, student body right, all this crap. And then you do have the player that plays 1 week and then doesn't play the next week, and then the guy gets thrust into the position. You have nobody who's probably necessarily ready that has had the, been able to run what the ones are running, whether on offense or defense. So, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be looked at. And it's funny because I was having the same conversation after the 2020 season when they made it to the CFP championship game. It's like, how do you sit there and say you need to blow a lot of this blank up, but you made it to the championship game of college football? It's a very interesting balance at that point, but there's just a lot of things going on right now. And I don't know if it's just a recency bias or whatever, but people are down on the recruiting. They're down on the strength and conditioning. They're down on this. They're down on that. It's wildly amazing how down people are on Ohio State, despite it being a number 4 team in the nation. But I don't necessarily disagree with people on a lot of instances. So I mean, if that's a temperature check, I don't think a lot of people are running a fever in the wrong direction. It's just kind of crazy that we're here at this point.
I got a fever for a lot of cowbell.
But like the 2020 season, Kevin, you mentioned that, and they do go to the championship game, and Ryan Day looks at changing stuff, but it's like, well, we made it to the championship game, and the issues that we have, he chalked most of it up to COVID. And then so you run through it in 2021 again, and you miss the playoffs because it turns out those issues should have been addressed. And I'm with you. Like, I'm one of the guys with all of the criticism about CJ Stroud, people wanting him to run, and it's like they just won by 38 points. Who needs to run on 3rd and 7 against Indiana? Like, that's not necessary. But now I'm also one of the people saying, like you, Kevin, he better be ready to run. He better be on the move as much as possible, because this is why you didn't run in September and October, is for this. And so, like, all of these things that, these injuries and resting players or whatever, you've done all of that for what is to come. And if Ryan Day said everybody should be healthy, save for the guy who's opting out in Jackson Smith and Jigba. And so you've done all the kid gloves for this stretch. And if you come up short, then you got to revisit that. And also, I still wonder about the turf issue and all of these injuries with that the players have suffered. I wonder if the turf is to blame on some of that.
Just a quick throwaway before we move on. As Tony says, you save all these guys to play for tomorrow. Well, today is tomorrow, so you've got to play for it. Or because if you're not playing for it, then it's like, well, we were just never going to do X, Y, and Z. You can't hold X, Y, and Z never to do X, Y, and Z. So now's the time to empty the bucket. If your goal is, if you truly are about team goals, if you truly are about reaching the end of the rainbow and all that comes with that, you're there. But now you got to get through Georgia and then potentially another game. If you get through Georgia, you can't be kicking the can down the road anymore.
It's what makes football trickier than the other sports to prepare a team for the long haul, but also to reach some kind of peak intensity level with all the physical demands of the sport and the injury quotient involved, and being at a certain intensity level every week and peaking against the better teams. And then, as you guys pointed out, with certain players somewhat protecting or babying these players, but then telling them, to run through a brick wall. And that leads us to a couple of super chats. One about CJ Stroud from Ferris concerning him possibly checking out for a week when the conclusion of the season was in peril. And I got to think a lot of these guys were expecting, USC is going to win, TCU is going to win. We're not going to be there anyway. So
I equate it to senioritis, where you finally, it's like, I'm done. I am finally done. And then it's like, oh, no. You've got like 2 more finals. And you're like, what? No, I don't have 2 more finals. And so you've got to, like, as Kevin said, re-engage. I think that is a real thing. And the good news for Ohio State is you have plenty of time to get back in to the fold, and Ryan Day has to make sure that that happens. And he was talking about that, and maybe not to he's talking to us, but also expressing this thought that you now have a second chance. You have a second life. We're not going to be passive. We're going to be loose. There's going to be no fear of failure. You're going to go after it and go get it. And it's like he's talking to the media, but it sounds like he's wanting these words to get to the players as well. You've got a second chance. Why not do something with it?
It's a huge risk reward opportunity for this football team, for this program, and for Ryan Day professionally himself. If they are able to just go off to a Rose Bowl or another bowl game like they did against Utah and play a good opponent, but a worthy opponent to a certain extent, but not on their level. The 10th best team in the country is far worse than the best team in the country. But now the reputation, the legacy is out there to be captured, or to be, another embarrassment could be on the horizon. We also have Ferris. We appreciate the super chats. Ferris, on this one, I got to say, we appreciate your super chat, but you're pretty much writing the answer right there. It's right there for you.
Can I hit on a CJ question? Question real quick. We may or may not get CJ today or tomorrow here in Columbus. He's headed off, obviously, to the award stuff. I presume Thursday, Friday, Saturday, wherever that's going to be. New York, maybe Orlando, and then New York. I don't even know where they do the thing on Thursday, if they even do it in person anymore or not. But certainly to New York for the Heisman Friday and Saturday. And during the course of the weekend, he's going to be doing interviews. There'll be Ohio State reporters there, and they're going to ask him point blank, what happened? What have you done in the 2 weeks since then? Where's your head at? So we're going to get a full idea of what he's thinking. I'm sure he's going to put his best foot forward and try and put a smile on it and say, we're going to go out and give it our best effort for good old State U here on the 31st. And yeah, I got the guys talked into it, and here we go. We're going to go do it. We're going to try, but we'll know. You'll be able to tell from body language this weekend, how has he bounced back from this, I think, a little bit, and how confident he sounds regarding the team that they're going to put on the field against Georgia. If he's kind of tentative with his answers and, we had some guys, or, goes down that path, then, we'll see.
As to critics piling on more with Day if they lose, I mean, is there still room on the pile? I don't know at this point.
As Coop said after the Arizona State Rose Bowl, our great fans are with us, win or tie. So there you go.
I think there'd be people critical even if they did win, just because they didn't win convincingly enough, or how they went about it, or whatever. But yeah, I do think that, and I've said this, I don't know if I've said it on a show yet or not. It all kind of runs together, that people are like, oh, you're playing with house money. You weren't supposed to, you guys weren't supposed to be part of the little 4-team soiree or anything like that. You guys can play fast and loose. Well, there are people calling for his head after the Michigan game. If they go and get beat by 30 points by Georgia, I don't think that those people are suddenly going to be like, we can accept this one. We're okay with this. Especially if a lot of the same problems are still there. So there's, the critics will be loud, and it's going to be a very important game for Ryan Day. But we'll see. Georgia's not concerned about the sleep habits of Ryan Day.
I still good.
If they win this game, I put it in the pantheon with Miami in 2003 and Alabama in 2014. That these are program type wins. If you come back from that type of a humbling defeat, worst loss at home in 23 years, worst loss in the series in 44 years. If you come back from that and are able to go down and beat the number one team, this is the same as beating Miami off their great run, the same as beating Alabama when you'd never done it before. This would be akin to all of that. And then in my mind, they'd be playing with house money. And then I don't think they'll have any problem if it's Michigan getting up to play that next game, considering the fact Michigan, rubbed their nose in it and play. I mean, we're going to be hearing about flag planning for 10 days. Let's just hope we have to listen to all the talk about flag planning for 10 days. If it comes to that, we'll all be happy.
It'll be a welcome distraction.
Yes.
The criticism, I think, obviously, depending on how this game goes and the type of loss that may happen, I think criticizing somebody for making the playoffs, I think we need to calm down about that. Like, you've made the playoffs. You're one of 4 teams. You're one of the 4 best teams. Should people be irate about that? I don't think so. So that's one thing. Also, like, I remember the 41-14 loss to Florida and people saying, gosh, this is going to set Ohio State back like 5 years. How do you overcome this? And Ohio State was in the championship game the next year based quite a large part on opinions of people. And still, they were there the next year. So I think even more so nowadays, like, you can have a bad loss in the playoffs and it doesn't really matter because next year you can earn your way right back in and you can set the narrative. Look how quick it took. Look how quickly Jim Harbaugh turned the narrative on Ohio State. Like, it took just one game to become now we are better than Ohio State. And then the second game absolutely proves it. And so these things can turn quickly. That's why I think, getting upset because you don't win it all. I think that is Alabama fans' level of spoil. Like, that's somewhere that it's not healthy to be there. I'll just say that.
Can I throw in this parallel? This was kind of an interesting thing to me. People remember the Golden State Warriors over the last 10 years have just, kind of been the preeminent team in the NBA. They haven't won it every year, but they're there quite a bit. And as I look it up, in 2017 and 2018, well, they won 3 out of 4. They won 2015 against Cleveland, then Cleveland won in 2016. Then they beat Cleveland in 2017 and 2018. And I thought their 2018 team was probably about as good as any team in NBA history. They seemed unbeatable, but then they had some injuries that kind of crept in there, and you thought they were just going to walk to a 3rd straight championship. And lo and behold, here came Toronto out of nowhere, and Toronto just – the last half of that season just took it away from them and took it away from everybody and won it, and they had the best player with Leonard and everything on the planet at that point. And to me, Ohio State feels like they were Golden State when they were really, really, really good, but some injuries have crept in, some doubt has crept in, and now they've opened the door to let Michigan, Georgia, whoever, take over the top spot in college football. And I'm saying it in a figurative sense. It just seemed like Ohio State was this dominant force for so long, and now, what's going on? I mean, it seemed like fait accompli. They were going to be in the championship game and maybe win it, and now they're just lucky to make the playoff and hoping they don't get blown out by Georgia. So I don't know. It just things kind of turned quickly, and they turned when we weren't really looking, kind of type thing.
When Kevin mentions people out there that say Ohio State should be playing with house money because of Georgia being the dominant team and the consensus number 1 and all of that, I don't know that this program, based on the expectations of the fans, has been playing with house money since Jim Tressel went to Michigan and won in 2001. I don't know that this program's played with house money since then. I think the expectations have been win national championships and own the Big Ten. And, in terms of Ryan Day, you could kind of parallel if they go to Atlanta and lose by 3 scores, maybe parallel his tenure at Ohio State, like a Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma, who repeatedly won the conference, lost playoff games, and usually in blowout fashion. But I don't even know if that's a parallel, because I think the expectations, and deservedly so, at Ohio State, or even, some Oklahoma fans might get after me because that's a great all-time blue blood program. But I don't even know if the expectations at Oklahoma come close to Ohio State. Well, they come close, but I don't think they're on the level, just because of the recruiting And because of the magnitude of the Michigan game and the expectation and demand to own the conference and then beyond.
Yeah, I think the Oklahoma teams you're talking about plateaued, and kind of that parallel I have with Golden State. They reached a point where they plateaued and they weren't getting better anymore, and some of it was due to the injuries. I just wonder if Ohio State's plateaued and has taken a half step back even from being a top 2 program in the country or top 3. Maybe they're not up there anymore. I don't know.
Back. Go ahead, Tony.
No, I got nothing.
Back to obviously Jackson Smith and Jigba's not playing. I don't think anyone's surprised by that. I don't know that that's a loss at this point. He wasn't present for the entire season. So that's that. It comes at a position where they're well stacked and fortified, and they've got the very best in the game there. Looking at the running back position, if all these guys, meaning the top 3, well, let's say the top 4 with Chip Tranum getting the carries that he did against Michigan and performing admirably well, being put in a bad position. What should be the strategy of playing time, carry distribution? I'm a Dallin Hayden guy after watching him against Maryland, I got to say.
Play the healthiest guys. Play the guys who have the most positive that they can bring you. I know ball security is an issue, and you worry about a true freshman in Dallin Hayden. Maybe you worry about a guy in Chip Trainum that for much of the season was not playing with the ball in his hands. But we saw what happened when you had backs out there that were not able to do what it is that makes them special. Going back to the Maryland game and Trevion Henderson, who I give all the credit in the world to, going out there and playing hurt and not being able, not being 40% of himself at that point. They try to bring Mayan Williams out for the Michigan game. He isn't necessarily Mayan Williams. I mean, Mayan Williams is plenty good, but it wasn't what we saw earlier in the year. So you need to really have an honest conversation with these guys, and hopefully Mayan Williams is right by the Peach Bowl. I'm not quite sure what the status is on Trevion Henderson. I mean, he went on to social media and talked about a broken bone and ligaments and everything else. But you need to, this is not the time to play the, elder statesman gets the, the benefit of the doubt card. You need to play the guys that are going to be able to give you the best opportunity. And if you do have to risk a negative play or 2 in there to get 30 positive plays, fine.
I just want to comment on G Fish saying a running quarterback would solve all the issues. Where is USC right now? Where is Tennessee right now? Where is Alabama right now? Where is North Carolina right now? Like North Carolina, like all of those guys have missed time except for, of course, Drake May at North Carolina. Like Caleb Williams got hurt in that game and couldn't finish, couldn't do as well as he needed to, and USC lost. And because he ran, and you don't need a running quarterback. You just need a quarterback that will pick up some yards. They don't need CJ Stroud to run 7-8 times a game. They just need the 1 or 2 times where it's the best choice and
to get a first down.
Yeah, and so I think we saw Justin Fields in 2019 and 2020 go into the playoffs and get beaten up, and was not even healthy in the 2019 playoffs, and then getting hurt in the 2020 Clemson game. So Ryan Day has seen that and, would like to have a healthy quarterback for the playoffs. And so he's got that, but we'll see if it helps. I think running helps. It doesn't solve all the issues.
All right. And
did you want to hit portal real quick?
Sure. Yeah, I was going to say, speaking of checking out, we got Jalen Johnson, we got Taraja Mitchell. Steve, you can go ahead on, of course, Taraja Mitchell was a guy that was supposed to be counted upon way back.
Way back, yeah. I did a survey on our site. Our friend Dan Hope over at 11 Warriors does a thing about snap counts, and I consulted with him, and he was fine with me taking his research and using it for a story on our site. And I cited it back to him and linked him as well to be completely fair and transparent that he provided the information for the story. But Ohio State, in my analysis, had 18 guys who are in their second, third, fourth, or fifth year that still have at least 1 year of eligibility left. Even the fifth-year guys have that super senior year from COVID that maybe a few of them could come back next year. 18 guys who played less than 10% of the snaps on offense or defense. I didn't look at special teams, didn't care about special teams. Guys come to play on offense, guys come to play on defense. And you had 18 guys who were, I'd consider upperclassmen. I left the freshmen out because it's too early to make a determination about whether, I didn't say so-and-so is going to transfer because he didn't get to play. I just shared with you, the reader at home, these are the guys, 18 of them, who played less than 10% of the snaps all season long on offense or defense. And these are the guys who you would figure would be susceptible to a transfer situation. And Taraja Mitchell was one of them. Jalen Johnson didn't play all season. He may have been banged up a little bit. He's from Cincinnati LaSalle, so that one hurts a little bit. An Ohio guy from a program that has produced some talent over the years, LaSalle. But, it is what it is. I think if they only lose a couple more guys into the portal, which, they probably will between now and the end of this window. It's a 45-day window, I believe, where guys can enter the portal at this point. And some of them may be committed to stay through the playoff at this point and finish the season. But I think they're going to come out with a net gain when it's all said and done. And positions I would look at, I think with Cam Brown leaving, you got to have a starting corner perhaps out of the or at least somebody who's going to push Hancock and J.K. Johnson for starting time. I think with Zach Harrison leaving, you need an impact defensive end. I love JT Tuimoloau. I like Jack Sawyer. But that's two guys. You need 4 or 5 war daddies up front, maybe a defensive tackle as well. Beyond that, you're losing probably both tackles, DeJuan Jones and Paris Johnson, I would think, to the NFL. Could use an offensive tackle. You figure Josh Fryer may have one of those spots. You could have a plug and play like they had with the kid from Rutgers. Was it Jonah Jackson? Was that a few years ago. A plug and play offensive lineman, I think, would definitely help the situation. Matthew Jones may leave as well, although you've got Enoch Vamahi who could step right in there. So those are my initial thoughts on the transfer portal. People are wringing their hands about it. There's already 1,000 guys in there. Somebody said that there's 85 guys at 130 schools, so like 12 or 13,000 players, maybe nationally or whatever, and 1,000 of them are in the portal or something. So, good luck to all those in the portal, I guess. And the grass is always greener on the other side of the septic tank.
The portal isn't a bad thing. It's not a great thing in terms of the lack of oversight and how some of the things are working. It isn't great in terms of there are going to be a lot of kids that are going to enter the portal only never to come out, at least not to another school. But for a school like Ohio State, it's easier to be able to keep the natural churn going on. You through past years have had guys that have just sat through the program. I mean, it's just kind of one of those situations. Now you can go and address recruiting misses and some things like that. I mean, I'm not here to sit there and say that it's not a case of that somebody would never be ushered into the portal. It's like, you're going to the portal, but I think that there's some guys that need that shove out of the nest sometimes a little bit. So we'll see. And I'm not saying that was the case with Jalen Johnson or with Taraja Mitchell, but there will be more. There certainly will be more names. And no, I'm not sitting on names and protecting them, but we know that there will be more names, and then we'll see what Ohio State's able to do, because obviously the Buckeyes are going to need to replace some key people and have some stop gaps because of some misses in terms of recruiting.
One quick thing before we go, and not a surprise, looks like Jeff Brom going to Louisville. So I think there's a candidate out there for Purdue, a former Purdue defensive coordinator who knows the state of Indiana recruiting, who is currently the head coach at Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman.
people are already trying to put Jim Leonard in there. I just don't know how quickly you go from an offensive-minded head coach to a defensive-minded head coach at a program like that. I mean, there's going to need to be some reshaping of the roster and some philosophies or whatever. I'm a big fan of offensive-minded head coaches. I think that you can find somebody to run your defense. If I were an AD putting together a coaching search, most of my attention would be on offensive-minded coaches.
I consider that an upgrade going from Satterfield to Brom. Cincinnati taking Satterfield. I don't know how well that's going to work out going into the Big 12. To be honest with you, I would have liked, and I know he's a retread, but at this point, I would have taken Matt Campbell, who at least knows the Big 12 and also has Ohio ties a little bit. I maybe would have gone that route, but I don't know. Cincinnati was in a tough spot going into the new conference, and it's going to be very competitive, even with Texas and Oklahoma eventually leaving. It's going to be extremely competitive. TCU is a program, that's way up there now. Oklahoma State consistently wins 9 or 10 games. So Oklahoma, well, they're leaving, but there's some other really good programs there, and Kansas State and Baylor, and a few others. But I have no idea what direction Purdue is going to go with that. I think Jim Leonard, kind of makes some sense. I guess he's breaking away from Wisconsin altogether, maybe after the bowl game here. So who is the head coach for them in the bowl game? Doesn't sound like he's going to be the head coach for the bowl game even.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Want to touch on this David Greenshield super chat from earlier in the show. How big of an issue has the D-line rotation been? I think there have been drives this year where you don't even have to look at the defensive line to know who is playing defensive line at those positions. And I think there have been issues there where it's like a lot of guys are playing that necessarily shouldn't be playing. And along with Zach Harrison leaving, you're also losing Javonte Jean-Baptiste and Tyler Friday as two more seniors. And those guys have been just guys basically throughout their career. And they take up reps. They allow Zach Harrison and JT Tuimoloau out to get a rest, but they haven't really necessarily given much more than that. And, on the interior, Jerron Cage has been around forever, a 6th-year guy, and you're going to be losing him. And I think those guys, haven't played their best at times this year. And they're generally, they're on their way out, and Ohio State still has to replace those guys. But I think the Mike Hall being injured has also been a thing, and he's been injured for most of the season. And so that's one of the reasons that he's not been out there as much. Tyleik Williams, is it a concern that you're still having issues of a guy staying in shape, being in shape, getting in shape 2 years into his career?
Yeah, I think that as you watch the rotation there, I think that you had 4 or 5 mainstay guys, and you probably always needed to have at least 2 or 3 of them on the field at the same time, and then you could hide the 4th guy to give somebody a blow. But too often we were seeing where they're trotting 3 in and trotting 3 out, and the 3 you're trotting in aren't anywhere near as good as the 3 you're trotting out. So, yeah, I agree. I'm not sure if there's going to be a changing of the guard with that coaching position or not after this season. Remains to be seen. Is Larry Johnson Jim Knowles' guy? The results here with the pass rush haven't been all that great. So I don't know. That to me, they've got to come up with something there.
David, thank you for the super chat. Kevin, we know you need to go, but we want to let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Noon. I can be found as well at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And my show, The Big Meat Kickoff, which can be found at YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. Still trying to decide what I want to do this week, but I've got some shows lined up for the coming weeks. It's going to be a lot of previews on Georgia and the college football playoffs, so be sure to find me there.
Folks, if you came in the last half hour, you want to catch the entire show, so please go back and watch the entire show with these 3, and obviously follow them at their respective sites. Tony, what do you got?
You can find me at BuckeyeHuddle.com. You can find me on Twitter at Tony Gerdeman, as it says there. We're going to be dropping a couple of podcasts per week for the next week or so, and then we're eventually going to move to daily again as the game ramps up. But really, I have nothing right now other than just some Georgia stuff that I will be writing. Yesterday, I dropped a story on Brian Day talking about how this is their second chance at life and how they have to make the most of it, and they're not going to be passive. They're going to be aggressive, that sort of thing. They're going to be people talk about, like, you mean like the 2020 Clemson game. Like, yes, if they can be like that and just come out swinging and continue to swing, then this could be a fun game.
We always appreciate Steve posting these shows on Bucknuts. Steve, what do you got going this week?
Just continuing to plug away. I did that survey about the upperclassmen and playing time. I'll probably do one on the freshmen and look at who's redshirting and who isn't. I've got that kind of in the hopper. I've got some other everything's a big project, getting ready for signing day coming up in a couple of weeks. And I go down my list, and that'll take 5 hours. That'll take 7 hours. That'll take 4 hours. And it's finding an unfettered block of time, and time management to do it. OSU basketball opening Big Ten play tomorrow against Rutgers, 7:00 at ESPN2. We'll be all over that. Should be a good one because Rutgers coming off a win over Indiana. So, it should be a fun week with that. I'm going up to New York a week from now for the North Carolina-Ohio State game at Madison Square Garden. Looking forward to that. And Patrick Murphy from our staff. Kevin, are you going to New York City?
I pulled the plug on the trip yesterday, and as you were kind of talking about the ability to talk more to CJ Stroud or whoever was talking about that, starting to regret that decision, but no, I won't be going.
I don't think he's going to win it, guys. I don't think he's going to win it.
I don't either.
I think it was Caleb Williams' award to lose, and by default, it may still be Caleb Williams' award. I don't know. I don't think who are the other ones? Max Duggan and Stetson Bennett. I don't think they're going to win. I think it's a 2-horse race between Stroud and Williams, and I think Williams is still probably the guy to beat. Could be a close balloting, but Duggan was a one-man wrecking crew for TCU in that game, and they just couldn't come up, with the win. But he showed the world what he's capable of. So, and I'm okay with Bennett being there. Hendon Hooker had a great year. Blake Corum had a great year. Unfortunately, both capped by injuries. And if they could be 6, that'd be great. So.
All right, folks, appreciate you being here. Buckeyes Live every Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Typically, that's why you subscribe and hit the bell for the notifications to know when we go live for sure. For Kevin, for Tony, for Steve, appreciate you being here. Check out the entire video. If you missed it, go back and watch the entire thing. It should be posted right now. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Thanks.